Okay, I'm going to be saying a lot of stuff today that I need you pretty desperately to internalize as far as your study, because as we just talked about, your IRB proposal is due next Tuesday, as we slept, which means another day of deadlines and donuts. But it also means that your IRB proposal has to be due next Tuesday. And if you haven't looked through the form yet, look through the form. It is incredibly specific. And it is 6 pages long. It is not going to write itself next Monday night. And if you wait until next Monday night to look at it, you're going to discover that you do not have 99% of the items that you need in order to get the job done. Because you need to do the legwork in advance to make sure that you have all of the approvals from any partnering organizations that you're going to need to have in order to get the work done. Now, if you happen to be doing a study within the school, we're lucky on that because the IRB is related to the school, so you will have all necessary permissions on that. But if you're reaching out to another site for your study, you got a week and a day to get a letter from them and you have permission to do it. I have to have that in paper form. Otherwise, we're approving whatever you submit to us next Tuesday or not. And I don't have the ability to reconvene the IRB 3 times because of a lack of information on your end. So I think you were told like a week ago to start get it working, getting those permissions and making those connections. You need to do that today is a good time to start that if you haven't done so yet. Because what you can't assume in the real universe out there is that people are the first person you talk to is going to know the answers. Or that they aren't going to have to go over their head or wait for board approval or things that are going to take you more than 24 hours to get taken care of. So at this point in the game, it's crazy important if you have not started that process, that you start that process today. In addition to that, Elliot specifically, I'm going to need, for a number of reasons, a signed note from mom or dad saying it's cool that you're hanging out in a prison. So that I don't...
How would I reach out to
They're going to have a public information officer. That's going to be your first place to start. Okay? And see from there. So that one in particular, since you're dealing with a government agency, there's going to be some red tape. Don't expect to have that answer tonight if you call right now. It's not going to happen. So reach out to the public information officer is going to be your first spot, and then usually there will be someone to take a look at that. Have you taken a look at the common rule as far as it applies to prisoners? Well, there are only 5 possible topics. You got to figure out how you're phrasing your research question in a way that's going to make those, and they're going to know that. So you're going to need to have that phrase before you make that contact. All of those things are crazy important. Some of you right now, when we're still talking about research, we're talking about like topic, and we need the question, and we need the question in its final form for next Tuesday. And you need to know what method you're using, and you need to know how you're going to analyze the information you get from that method. We're there. You've been waiting to be there. You've been gunning for it. Well, you're there. You now need to step on it and get the job done with it. That's crazy, crazy, crazy important. Okay. Take a look at page 135 with me. If you take a look at the excerpt from the Moshke article on 135, this is an interesting, there's some things on this I have some thoughts on. We'll see what your thoughts are. Ever greater numbers of us will be asked at some point in our lives to participate in a research study. How many of you have been asked at this point in your life to participate in a research study? Okay. We might be invited to participate in surveys and focus groups, asked to let research conduct studies or tissue or medical information, or recruited for clinical trials to test whether drugs, medical devices, or biologics, like vaccines and genetic materials, are safe or effective. One company involved in recruiting human subjects estimates that the number of participants needed to fill industry-sponsored trials grew from 2.8 million in 1999 to 19.8 million in 2005. There's also a growing need for children, the elderly, and people with certain diseases to enroll in studies that test interventions targeted to these populations. The very fact that record numbers of people are being recruited to research makes thoughtful attention to how we safeguard human subjects of the utmost importance. 19.8 million people is a lot of people. And that's that we knew of in 2005. So 12 years later, we have a lot more going on, and that's before you even get into kind of opinion focus group, commercial sort of items, that direction. So there's a ton of need out there. 135 at the bottom talks about the Institutional Review Board. when it says that it is a committee of specific composition, here is how that goes in our universe. It's a committee of 5, okay, at least, has to be at least 5 humans on it who have been trained in the use of humans in research, and what the federal requirements are for safety and security in that situation. Those pieces of the puzzle for us are that they are completing, with 2 exams, they are completing the same NIH training you are. Those 2 exceptions, people who have already gone through the full 8-hour course from CITI to be certified in human subject research. There has to be a scientist. There has to be a not a scientist. There has to be, if you're doing anything to deal with kind of emotional issues, you have to have someone who is trained in human behavioral issues. You have to have someone who is not affiliated with an organization that's doing the research. Now, those places can overlap, so you can have a non-scientist who's outside of the building. And also, the other requirement is that it is supposed to be balanced as far as gender, and also taking into consideration, ethnicity and any other sort of statuses that might be important when it comes to the research that's being considered. For instance, if any of you were doing race-based research, we would want to have somebody who's not Caucasian sitting on the panel. And so you consider the research that is being presented to you when that moment arrives. In our particular case, we're going to have a prisoner spokesperson basically on the board for our purposes, just for the discussion of Elliot's study. After that, that person can peace out, home slice. Okay. And so the composition of the board doesn't have to be static over the entire period of time. Notice and this deals with anything that is obviously medical, has to go before an IRB, but even anything that involves a human, which means that you are interacting with someone personally, which means there is a difference between I am going to stop people at the mall and ask them what their response to the advertisement on the wall is, versus I am going to stand by that advertisement and write down what people's reactions all are. That second study is not human subjects research. That second study does not need to have IRB approval, because you are watching someone at an openly, publicly accessible place doing openly, publicly accessible stuff that is not them opting to or opting out of necessary. You're not taking extensive enough notes. You aren't prying into their not public reactions to things. Because of that, you don't have to. The second you decide that you're going to intervene with that person in any way, then you have to have the IRB approval, because that it becomes human subject research. That second paragraph on the bottom of 135 is an important thing to know, and an important place for me to step in and tell you why that you do, even though it says you don't. If you are doing human subjects research for a class, under normal circumstances, you do not have to have IRB approval. The reason we do is that and I use the word carefully here, it says you don't if you are not going to have your works published. Published means in any way, shape, or form made public. Okay, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have it in paper format. Now, there are schools within the AP research universe who are having books made of their students' work. There is a possibility for some of you, and there are 2 reasons why we're going to have IRB approval for our human subjects research in here. Number 1 is I think it's incredibly important that you present your stuff to the public. After you've done months of work on a project, I think that people need to know that that's a thing. I think parents need to have a right to bring their buddies in and show off how awesome you are. I think your colleges need to know what's getting ready to walk in their door. And I think that the school, as supporters of the program, also need to have access to seeing what's coming out of the program. I think this becomes a much harder program to keep up and running if no one ever sees the outcome of your research. Inherently, this is the big process, the big project that's going to have the most significant educational outcomes, as far as something tangible to hold on to the end. But if we can never show it to somebody, what are we doing? So that's number 1 reason, is I want to be able to have that symposium at the end of the year so that you can share your stuff. The number 2 reason is if you get something out of your work that is the beginning of something that could be publishable for real, I don't want us to have not gone to IRB, because the second we don't go to IRB, you can't use anything within that time that you've been studying at all in a published piece. So you have to start over from scratch. My qualitative class I'm taking right now, we are not going to IRB with our set of interviews for this semester, which means I can't use any of the interviews I did this semester if I decide to turn this into my thesis, which is a distinct possibility. Okay? Now, the good thing, she's only requiring us to do 3 interviews. I'm only losing 3 interviews worth of data, but losing 3 interviews worth of data. So I don't want you, if you get something that's good, to have to chuck all the data that you have collected and never be able to use it for anything, because you cannot retroactively go to IRB. They will not give you permission after the fact to use the stuff that you've attained, even if you get all the necessary permissions from the peoples. Okay? So those are the 2 reasons that we are going to one, even though AP doesn't necessarily require that we do that thing. Okay, is that clear? We got it? Okay. Okay, if we look over on 136, here are a few things as far as some guidelines for ethical research practices. And you guys are going to get way more information than I'm going to go over on this when you do your NIH training, but some things to keep in mind. Ethical research practices when it comes to the use of human subjects. The common rule sets out 3 primary factors that need to be considered when it comes to human research. The first is respect for persons. Okay? What this means is that if I'm researching you and I'm sitting around chatting with you and asking you questions and I'm recording you and I'm going to go back and transcribe it and turn it into my study, you have a right to know that that's happening. You also have a right to consent. So you have a right to know, and you have a right to say yes or no, you want to be a part of it. And that consent be pulled anytime. Okay? Particularly, a couple of you doing interview studies in here, I think particularly Elliot and Jayla, may see situations where that consent is pulled in the middle of an interview, where they're like, I'm really done with this. Or in Jayla's case in particular, you could have some emotional issues that come up that stop the situation from happening. And that's cool, that's fine, okay? Those people can pull out at any point in time. You can still use what they gave you when you were under consent, okay? So you don't have to throw out their entire interview up till that point if they remove consent at that point forward. Okay? So those are the big things as far as respect of persons. Now, under that comes the sub-rules of B, C, and D, which lead us into special situations with pregnant women. I don't think anyone's doing anything in here that we really have to consider that as a secondary item with, unless, for instance, like they're probably not going to throw you a pregnant prisoner. So if Moyd is at the IMA and happens to interview a pregnant woman about, that's probably not a huge issue, okay? None of these are specifically things about the pregnancy. If you're doing things specifically about the pregnancy or you're targeting pregnant women, then we have to consider that. With prisoners, because of the Stanford study, because of that, they are very careful about what type of research they allow within a jail or prison setting, and making abundantly clear. There are a couple things that Elliot's going to have to add to his informed consent sheet about that, because it has to be made abundantly clear that this is not a requirement of their sentence, and that communicating with Elliot is not going to help them get out early or set bail. Okay, this will not be a parole committee consideration for them. So those things have to be overtly said as you're attaining consent with a prisoner. Now we also have a limited number of things, because since what you don't want with a prisoner is someone to go, look, I have a whole bunch of people who are stuck in a building bored out of their mind. I'll just go study them because they're an easy target audience. That's not what we want. So you want to make sure that the research actually needs a prisoner involved as the point of their study. Some C deals or D deals with children, people under 18, which basically means that in addition to them, we view it as assent instead of consent with children, so that they go, yeah, I don't hate doing this. And their parents have to give consent as well. So, for instance, if you're doing a clinical trial with a toddler, okay, because when we get to this in a second, one of the things you have to consider is giving equal time kids, especially in medical studies. If you're doing that, then you have to allow the kid to assent. Now, if you're injecting them with something and they scream in pain and say they don't want to do it, then you kind of weigh the next point of this against each other. The first one is respect for persons. The second point is beneficence, which basically is the benefit to society greater than the hardship to the person involved. Okay? So even if you have a writhing, screaming toddler during your med trial who's going, no, 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 who is clearly not assenting to your study, if the parents are still cool with it, that study probably continues with the screaming toddler, because the good to society is more important than the screaming toddler at that point in the game. So you want to think about your study in that terms. What does society gain, especially involving yourself with humans? The third part is the concept of justice. That means that when you are doing a study, you have to give everyone kind of a fair shot at being a part of it. Everyone within your target group should have a fair shot at being involved. That means you're not just going, oh, I'm only going to talk to guys on this one because I know more guys. Nope. Okay. You have to. It's in federal policy that you have to make sure that you have a fair number of women involved. That if your sampling comes out that you don't have to think about this if you're doing qualitative so much, but you do want to think, have I somehow not included ethnic minorities in my qualitative pool? If so, why is that, and how can I fix that problem? Qualitative is easy because you have ongoing sampling happening, but you want to make sure that there is that kind of like fairness, that everyone's getting studied equally, and that it's fair to everyone who is involved. So those are the three major practices when it comes to human subjects research. 3 talks about specific inquiry methods that need approval from IRB. Anytime you intervene with a human, if you touch a human, you poke a human, you feed a human something, you talk to a human, then you have to have the A-OK of IRB in order to do the thing. Okay? If watching a person, you probably don't. But anytime you intervene with a human, you have to have IRB approval. So interviews, clinical studies, taste tests, all have to go through IRB. So yes, notice for class use, you don't have to go through IRB. You still have to be careful. So when Stats rolls around with their like gummy bear taste test for people, they still have to take safety precautions to make sure that the food is okay, but they don't have to go through an IRB because it's not being published to the world. Okay. Sorry, my brain went for a second. Exempt studies are going to be things that don't intervene. So if all you're doing is watching from a distance, I don't need to know what's going on as far as an IRB. For instance, I read a study last summer that started off as an exempt study. Then they found out they couldn't have it be an exempt study, and so they had to go back and get IRB approval once they shifted their methods. Because what they were going to do was hang out in large settings of humans out in public and eavesdrop on people to see what people said when they talked about what it was like to be white. Problem: no one talks about what it's like to be white. Okay? It is kind of the default mode in our head for those of us who are Caucasian, and so we don't really address it. We don't sit around and talk about, well, like, wow, this was a particularly white day in my life. That wasn't how that went. So because of that, and because people were not vocalizing that in a public setting, they were like, well, we are getting zero data, so we now have to go back and figure out what we're going to do. So it became an interview study. So as it became an interview study, they had to stop where they were, go back, rewrite the study, get IRB approval, and then continue. Because once they talked to people, then they could start to get that parameter of what whiteness was defined for them. But they did have to go back to IRB on that. If you're not touching, intervening with a human, you are an exempt study. We're still filling out paperwork in here, though, because the board will exempt you. I won't. Notice Animal Care and Use Committee. Is no one in here is doing animal research, are you? Nope. Okay. If there was, then we have to go through a few extra steps as far as that is concerned. Usually what we do within the AP community is hook that person up with a university that will do the rat studies for them or with them, and then we're going through their animal care and use process. TV timeout. Yesterday, I was at the Bills game. My friend's nephew was there. He works for United. Just last week, they were unpacking a 500-pound package. That's a lot of weight off of the airplane. Problem, it went off of the guides and cracked open. It was 500 pounds of hamsters for Eli Lilly.
Ooh, live hamsters.
Mm-hmm.
Live?
Yeah, they were lab hamsters. 500 pounds of hamsters. They ended up missing 10 because the container cracked and they couldn't find them.
That's amazing.
Like, and can we have that Samuel L. Jackson like part two, please? Hamsters on a plane. I want to see that movie. It's like, oh, you don't think about that. You don't think about the like 500 pounds of lab hamsters and shit, Lily. But it's true. We talked about the IRB and how we're going to get there from here, which is through me. My IRB is getting trained as we speak. Yes. Mm-hmm.
You said it'd be equal in gender.
Uh-huh.
Mine is specific to women gender, but I still have to look at the men through the movie as well.
It depends on what you're looking for.
Okay.
What are you looking for is the question, because you're going to sample the right people who will answer that question. The goal of the justice piece of the puzzle is not to exclude men or women just because they're men or women. If, for instance, you're looking at like how people view the gender construct within a movie, it might be a valid thing to have a male perspective on that. But if you're only looking with how it is within females, then there's no use to because you're not looking for that. Depends how writing a research question. The research question becomes all important about now. If you haven't flat out written your research question as you want it to be, get that bad boy for the next 24 hours. So where we are, it is time. Okay. Okay, we'll look at the IRB documents here in a second. Okay. And actually, there is a paper version of that on the next several pages as far as what you're going to need for the IRB, your IRB proposal that is available to you in Canvas. Starts on page 137. And as you look through, how many of you think you're going to be doing an exempt study right now? You're just doing literature review and you're not talking to humans. Aren't you talking to humans? Did you just say you're talking to humans?
No, I was doing a movie now.
So you're not talking to humans?
No.
Then you don't have to worry about the justice gig. You're good. Okay, so we've got 4 of you probably staring at an exempt study right now who are not actually talking to humans. So yay, yours is going to be pretty easy, okay? You're still going to fill out some stuff here, but I'll show you some differences here. So up at the top, all the contact information, we are actually going to go through, when these are turned in, I will go through and de-identify everything. Because that's how it would normally go into a board without your name, so that people don't know. And particularly for us here, you are going to know 4 of the 5 board members. They're in the building, okay? You have teachers on the committee. So because of that, I can't have my non-science person being like, oh, I like Elliot, so it's okay. Okay, it can't be that. So we de-identify to take that information out so it takes out any initial bias. Yeah.
But I still ask people to lead me in directions.
Yes, this is definitely, you can definitely be an exempt study and still ask a PhD for some advice on some stuff. Okay? And you can cite that. Where this becomes is if you're doing a survey of PhDs to come up with information about stuff. That's a whole different gig. Okay, so yes. Just a moment on that one. Here, okay, so as we're going through, you take a look, the top is all given. Okay, that next chunk, you mark if you are doing research with any of those special groups that are listed there. Okay, so children under 18, economically disadvantaged, individuals with intellectual disabilities, elderly folks, prisoners, or individuals with physical disabilities. Any of those give us an extra oomph into what we're considering in an IRB. Yes?
When it says where will the work be done, how specific does that have to be?
Pretty specific. Pretty specific. Now, I'm not asking where you're going to write the study. I'm asking where you're interviewing the people.
Yeah. Oh, that's like my room.
Okay, you're like, my bedroom? That's kind of creepy if you answer that way. So we want to know which jail Elliot is going to talk to his prisoners. We want to know that Moyd's going to the IMA. We want to know where Jayla is going to be, especially in all honesty, where Jayla is going to be, because she has a marginalized population twice over that she's going to be talking to about sensitive topics. So having a patient to hold those interviews that isn't in the middle of the main stairs during a passing period is an important gig. Okay. And then you have checklists down toward the bottom of the page. Are we collecting identifying data? Here we go. The answer to that should pretty much for all of you be no. Okay, run away from that. You don't want identifying data. You will be referring to them by fake names and or by like participant A said yada yada yada. What you will be using as far as identifying on any of this. You can't refer to Perry Meridian High School. You can't refer to Indianapolis. You can't refer to anything specific in the study. It has to be a suburban metropolitan school corporation. Okay, it has to be that you talk to a 16-year-old Caucasian female who said yada, 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 yada. Okay, those are things that you can use, but they have to be de-identified. I shouldn't be able to read your study and know who you're talking about. Okay, so no, you should not collect any identifying data. Will it be identifiable by people who identifiable by individual be shared with anyone? So no, you're not going to do that either. Are the participants being offered an incentive? So are you giving them money to participate in your study? That's probably a no. Okay. Is participation in the study voluntary for the individuals? Well, we hope so. That's a requirement of the federal law, so that 4 should be a yes. Will participants be fully informed about the benefits and any risks? Yes. It will be on your informed consent page, where you'll say, hey, the benefits of the study are that you'll probably, I'll share the results when I get done and you'll know more about your situation. The risks are it might upset you. You might find some of these a little difficult to answer. That's usually what risks are for a qualitative study. Okay. Will participants be videotaped during the project or study? I suggest no to videotaping. I suggest yes to audio taping. You're less crossing into gray area if you audio tape. You will need to record audio because you're going to have to transcript your interviews and type them all out word for word in order to have your data in a hard copy. Yeah, because you're not going to videotape them. Okay. Will participants' privacy and personal information be protected? And notice this doesn't explain how you're going to do it. So you're going to say, I'm going to de-identify all of my studies. Their consent forms will be kept separate from the de-identified data. Okay. So those are the sorts of things that are going to help with that situation. Will participants be debriefed following the completion of the project or study? Debriefing became important because of the Milgram study, because they were being misled and then just left to continue the rest of their lives wondering if they really shocked a person to death or not, as opposed to going, never mind, this was kind of a gig, we were trying to see how you were, here he is, he's fine. That debriefing would have helped significantly, and they didn't do it during the Milgram study. So the point at that, I would suggest, if you're doing a study that might cause someone some sort of emotional hardship, that you come ready with a sheet of paper to hand them at the end that has helpline numbers and people who might be able to support them after the study. Okay. And in that case, you are debriefing by giving them further access after that is over. Okay. Will they be debriefed? Yes. Will participants prior to the project indicate informed consent? That should be for everyone. Yes. Okay. Are data sources clearly identified, such as interviews, yada, yada, yada. And the goal of that is yes, you're going to have to be as specific as humanly possible on all of this. I need to know all of the details. And then notice you're going to check all that you apply, and you're going to estimate the number of people in each of those groups you're going to include. Here goes my statement on this one. Aim high. Because you can't go a person over what you put down after they okay your approval. Okay, they're not going to care if you're 5 short. They're going to care if you're 1 over. So if you come up with oh, this would be really great, I need 1 more person to interview, we have to reconvene the board to reapprove you for an increased number. So aim a little high, give yourself plenty of room. Most qualitative studies have at least 12 people, and most of the good ones that get published are aiming at around 30, but those are also 25-page studies instead of 15-page studies. So if you're 20 is probably a good number to be aiming for as far as interviews with people. And especially if you're looking for sampling that will keep getting you different answers. So you're asking different types of people with different responses every time and digging for information that way. But if you put down 20, you cannot interview the 21st person. Okay. So give yourself a little bit of some leeway. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. On this, they're being faculty of like an educational institution, so they aren't necessarily meaning that. So in that particular case, I would not do that. I would use those as kind of, well, not really general public either. So I guess you could mark the staff members as faculty for that. Yes. So we want you to be as specific as possible, but aim a little high on that one. Okay, then it's going to ask you for an abstract, your method statement, and you're going to have to include your voluntary participation and your informed consent to forms. Both of those. That's 2 permission slips basically that you need to have. Okay. And then you're going to have to give them a sheet. All of the sheet with the informed consent should include their confidentiality and data protection information. So you're going to say, hey, I'm protecting your confidentiality and your data. Okay. You'll be de-identified. Your permission slip will be stored separately from the data. No one will be able to identify you. The risks of participants, that risk assessment, here's where it comes from. That risk assessment, you literally need to think, for the average human being who's going to participate in your study, what could be the negative side effects? Okay. Most of you're not studies that are going to have huge side effects. Probably Jayla is the one who is close to having any sort of negative reactions to what's going on. Okay? Because she could be having some very triggering conversations with her study participants. And so in that particular case, what we're looking at then could be emotionally difficult. And that's where you want to reframe that, like, at any time in the study you are uncomfortable, it is okay to end it. And then here is a sheet of paper with the suicide prevention hotline and all of your guidance counselors' information. Okay? Because we aren't expecting you at 17 to be able to solve their mental health issues. Okay? One of the studies I have in the pipeline deals with frequently people observe sexist language in a high school. And in order to do that, I have to put down pieces of sexist language that you then tell me how often you hear it. So for some people, it's going to be highly offensive to have the teacher hand you a survey that asks you how many times you hear the word pussy over the course of a day. Okay? So that's just kind of something you have to throw in the risk assessment, that like this could be some offensive language that could be troubling to you. Okay? We aren't doing any studies into where someone like it's going to include like side effects may include up to death. Is not what we're aiming at. Okay? Benefits, don't overpromise. Okay, I'll share the outcome of my research with you, and you might know some more stuff is like probably where you're going for most of this. Okay, you aren't going to be able to overpromise on the benefits thing, and those are where Elliot needs to get clear that he's not talking parole board for anyone. That's where you need to make it clear that you're not talking to the parole board for anyone. Okay.
These questions.
Yeah.
Like this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not like talking to anyone. Like, what do? I just do it blank?
On a lot of these, those of you who are exempt are just going to be like NA all over the place.
So we like put that in the box.
Just go like this.
Yeah, most of you who are exempt are going to hand me a whole bunch of not applicable. Okay? A whole bunch.
Alright.
Yes.
What if you're not interviewing anyone specifically, but you're still observing a group of people?
Okay,
Do they need to know
are
that?
you looking at doing the escape room?
Yeah, kind of.
Excellent. Okay. I was like, I hope that's where he goes. If that's where you're headed, then you will still need an informed consent because they need to know in that particular situation. If it were like they were just walking around the mall, you wouldn't need that. But since it's going to be like they paid to be there, it's not an area that's open to general public at that time, then you'll just need them to sign the informed consent waiver usually probably at the desk. You probably don't even have to meet the people you're studying.
And that'll be something I produce, right?
Yes.
With the use,